Noah's Blimp has a special position among all of Bedard's paintings. Since it depicts the Great Flood from the Book of Genesis, it belongs in the category of historical painting. Historical painting, as opposed to other types like portraits, landscapes and still lifes, is devoted to historical events like battles as well as to mythological and religious topics. According to Genesis, God chose Noah to warn of the coming 40-day flood. This enabled him to build the ark, a floating, box-like boat, and thus to rescue himself and his family. Also rescued were the world's animals. Depending on their species, either a pair or, as with the birds, more pairs were brought onto the ark. For many centuries, biblical themes were the predominant topic in art. Thus, the theme of the flood has been treated often in art history, and several motifs from this biblical narrative have been frequently depicted. The construction of the ark, the animals boarding the ark, the deluge and people's struggle against the water. The dove and the olive branch, as well as Noah's sacrifice and the rainbow. Two paintings that, like Noah's Blimp, depict no solid land but only sky and water are William Turner's Light and Color, The Morning After the Deluge, and George Watts' The 41st Day After the Deluge. In these two 19th century pictures, the artists are primarily interested in depicting the violence of nature and the power of God. This is why both highly atmospheric pictures focus on an intense play of color and light. For Watts, the sun represents the omnipotence and mercy of God, and why the ark is visible in either. In contrast, in Bedard's picture, the airship, Noah himself and animals are quite clearly recognizable. Bedard's play of light and color is also very different from Turner's and Watts'. Unlike the two other artists, Bedard uses no warm colors to create a particular mood, but only the local colors of the sky, clouds and sea. He uses other means to underscore that the storm is over. The dark thunderclouds are receding in the background. The height of the waves does not seem really threatening, and the airship is at safe distance from the waves and the thunderclouds. It is headed for a cloudless part of the sky, so a cheerful, optimistic basic mood is created. One of the particularities of Noah's Blimp is that Bedard's picture deviates from the traditional modes of depiction. The floating ship is replaced by an airship, so that Noah and the animals are not drifting on the water, but in the air. This approach is unique in art history. It transports the biblical scene right into the 20th century. The first of this kind of steerable, gas-filled airships were not built until after the Zeppelins. In Noah's Blimp, Noah himself also looks more like an inventor or the young Albert Einstein than like a biblical character. The theme, already often treated in paintings in the 16th and 17th century, thus takes on great timeliness and becomes interesting for the current viewer. He recognizes the biblical story of the deluge, but has to temporarily situate it in the present, due to the kind of ship shown. He is also aware that the story of the deluge is based on a traditional narrative, while the airship itself seems extremely real and could thus definitely exist. Noah's Blimp thus contains two inherent contradictions. On the one hand, to the time of the event depicted, in times past or now, and on the other hand, to the reality of the event, truth or fiction. These are as confusing as the discrepancy between the calm mood and the bullet holes in Bedard's painting, Sitting Ducks. They lead the viewer to question his former ideas. Looking at Noah's blimp, he starts challenging the mental images he previously had on Noah's Ark. Viewing other examples of historical painting leads to the feeling that that's how it might have happened. Looking at Noah's blimp, however, what comes to the foreground here is the question, could it have happened this way at all? Bedard's depiction of the deluge is completely unusual and unexpected, and thus ignites a thought process on allegedly clear concepts. Several layers of questions have to be unveiled to correctly interpret the painting. Why is there a pair of ducks and giraffes aboard the blimp, while most other species are represented by individual animals? Is there a symbolic meaning to the chosen animal species as in most historical paintings? For example, in the Middle Ages, monkeys were chosen to represent human malignity. In the painting we find a chimpanzee and a gorilla. Does Bedard really want to tell us that human wickedness was on board, thus survived and therefore still exists today? Bedard is not a painter of the Middle Ages, but a contemporary artist, and thus his message is a different one. Why were just the animals we see in the painting selected for Noah's blimp? And why do only some of the animals look ahead like Noah, while the other animals seem to be disoriented? Bedard wants us to screen what we see and think about it, rather than taking everything for granted without thinking. In Bedard's pictorial universe, not all the animals managed to board Noah's Ark in time. Quattro, a four-footed bird, came too late. Thus he is not shown in Noah's blimp. He nevertheless managed to survive the deluge by flying without interruption for 40 days. Since then, made shy by the traumatic experience, he remains concealed in the world, but we can encounter him anywhere at any time. Since he had to adapt to survive, Quattro changes his external appearance like a chameleon, and thus there are numerous variations of Quattro. But one always recognizes him by his 4 feet, which give him his name. For Bedard, the imaginary figure Quattro represents latent individual creativity and fantasy. Each single person's perceived reality differs from the objective truth due to his interpretation of this truth. Fears, worries, wishes and hopes are projected and worked through and thus influence perception. Quattro is always present in everybody's interpretation of the external world, and so there are meanwhile as many Quattros as there are people. By means of Noah's blimp and the creation of Quattro, Bedard wants the viewer to challenge own assumptions and long-time viewpoints. Could the Ark have been a blimp? Why do we always stick to initial ideas and traditions and do not re-evaluate them? Noah's blimp is supposed to be an initial spark to reconsider firm concepts and bring them into question. Therefore, although the depicted scene has a biblical background and does not correspond to the topics usually covered by the artist, the piece is a typical painting by Bedard.